The second scripture reading this morning is a continuation of the Genesis text that we started before. It is continuing in the 39th chapter, picking up with the second half of the 6th verse. If you want to read along in the Pew Bibles, they can be found on page 35. Just be aware it is a slightly different translation. The other thing to be aware of is a teaching moment. When the scripture was written in its original form, the chapters and the verses weren't numbered. That's something that came in much later. And so the divisions sometimes match up with the way we think today, and sometimes they don't. So that's why you have a 6a and a 6b split, because when the verses were added in the medieval period, someone decided to organize it differently than I want to organize it. And since they are not here and I am, now Joseph was handsome and good looking. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master has no concern about anything in the house. And he has put everything that he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her or be with her. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in to me to lie with me." And I cried out with a loud voice, and when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Then she kept his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to insult me, but as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." When his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, saying, "This is the way your servant treated me," he became enraged. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. He remained there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. He gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one that did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. May God's blessing rest upon the experiences of Scripture on this day, upon the meditations of our hearts and minds, and may it guide the words of my lips. So I get to wrestle with texts in a public setting twice a week. It's a gift that you all have given me. And I got to wrestle with this text once already this morning, and I have to say, I'm not done. I'm not yet limping, and I do not believe I have quite yet received the blessing that this text has to give. See, we do the texts that we do. I bring the texts that I bring to the worship committee because it's a discipline. I use a lectionary as a discipline, and the discipline gives texts to guide what I do so that I'm not just picking what I always like to do, because there's texts I like, and there's texts that I would avoid like the plague. And the lectionary pushes me to get into it. And the worship series helps sort of guide what I'm doing, this idea of a lifeline with Joseph here in this story. And when this text came to me, I have to admit that the first time I looked at it and said, okay, well, it's Joseph. I know about Joseph. Do a little song and dance routine, I guess. And then it's the unnamed woman, which happens a lot in Scripture. It's unfortunate in some ways. And then I start traveling in the commentary circles, the conversation circles that I travel in when I'm prayerfully concerning these texts and considering these texts. And there are people going, what if this was Josephina, Potiphar, instead of Joseph and Potiphar's wife? How are we going to experience this text today in the midst of everything that is going on in the world right around us and beyond, versus, say, the experience of it a year or two ago even? How does this relationship, this power structure that we are experiencing in the text, how are we hearing it differently now? And that's where I'm wrestling. I don't have a good answer for that. I'm still mourning the way that we treat each other, in the way that power is used and abused. But one thing that is evident in that text throughout, and I think is worth getting a hold of today, is this underlying idea that God is already at work. God is already at work. This story that we find Joseph in, this moment that we have read about in the lectionary, is connected to previous moments going all the way back to last week in Abram, when God called and said, "You will be a blessing to all the nations." Now Joseph, the text tells us, was a handsome guy. We know from the Joseph story going a little further back that he was a favorite. He was beloved by his father especially. In fact, he was considered sort of number two in the whole household, Joseph was. We know that Joseph had this great looking garment that he was, you notice I had to put it back on, I couldn't go without, right? Joseph had this garment and he wore it, and he was loved and beloved in some circles, and yet this position of power that he had, the place and the prestige that was connected with all of that, it also rubbed some people the wrong way. Sometimes we just react poorly to people in authority. You know, that's one of the things that led me to the disciples. I came from a tradition that had a hierarchy, and I didn't like the idea of somebody telling me what to do. I had an authority issue. An issue with authority. So it's, I ended up in the disciples. Right where I was called to be. So Joseph's brothers took Joseph and they threw him in a pit. And they took his garment away from him. They took away the emblems of power and prestige. They took him from the place of power and prestige, and they put him in a hole. And they were going to leave him there, but then they felt bad about what they were doing, and so they pulled him out of the hole and they sold him off, as older siblings are wont to do with younger siblings at times. That's why the young ones have to be, wily. Joseph ends up in Egypt, where God is already at work. And he is in the household of someone who is functionally the number two person in Egypt as far as officers are concerned, Potiphar. And Joseph ends up as the number two person in Potiphar's household. It's Potiphar and then it's Joseph, because it's a patriarchy. The wife is set aside. So Potiphar and Joseph, the enslaved, non-Egyptian, number 2 in the household again. Once again, Joseph has been brought up from this place of the pit, and he has been given the great garments, and he looks the part. The text doesn't tell us this directly, but we know that people in places of power and prestige, as broadly defined by our culture and civilization, tend to look the part. Joseph was back on top in a lot of ways. Almost as good as it gets. With power and prestige and place. He was in a palace. And then this moment occurs, and he finds once again it is all taken away. He lost his place. He lost his prestige. He lost his garment. Again, you'd think he'd learn to hang on to these things by now. And he is thrown into a pit. Put down in a hole in a prison. And it's interesting that the text mentions a prison because in the ancient Eastern Mediterranean world, there wasn't a lot of prisons. The cultures didn't have use for prisons. The Egyptians were, in fact, one of the only ones. We can read other texts. You read the 10 best teachings that Moses brought down from Sinai. Nothing about going to prison in there. You read Hammurabi's code. There's nothing about prison in there. The Egyptians had prisons. And others would eventually adopt them. Because the Egyptians were organized, the prisons had to be run. It pays to be educated. That's what got Joseph into his position in Potiphar's household. He was educated, and that's what elevates him into prison. So a lesson to everybody, make sure you get your education. And so we have in this trajectory of the Joseph story, this place, power, prestige moments where it's cycling like this throughout the story, and God is at work under all of it. And so what I think it is highlighting for us in this place where, I'm wrestling over here still with this Potiphar's wife and everything, but where we're at with what I'm doing here is when Joseph is in the height of heights according to the way we define height of heights, God is at work. And when he is down in the low of lows, God is at work. And then when he goes back up again, it's God is at work. And so on and so forth. And it's almost as if, in fact, it is as if people are reacting to what God is doing. They are attracted to Joseph because God is doing things through Joseph. And that can elevate the stock of any person. We see God at work in a person or in a congregation, and suddenly the parking lot is full and the place is just bouncing. And then the things of power and prestige and place go away. God is at work still. But the measurements that we have taken as society say that Joseph had failed, or a church had failed, or a minister had failed, or whatever it is, because it's no longer in this elevated place. It has come down to this low place. But what Joseph is, what he is showing us in this ark is that God is at work. And when we are grounded, when we have built ourselves upon that rock indeed, when we are there, even if it is uncomfortable, we are where we need to be. Because God is already at work. And so that's where I've been wrestling with much of this week. That's what I've been doing. But then I've got this thing over here with Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And I've had at least one person sort of, reflect upon the conversation between Joseph and Potiphar's wife, and they said they've never known a gentleman to act that way. But I think something else that Joseph shows us that is a universal thing for us to hang on to is that no is a complete sentence. Don't have to explain. No is no. Whether it was Josephina and Potiphar or Joseph and Potiphar's wife, that will be the case. And God is at work under all of it. And so here we are today. We have this thing going on over here that I'm still just, there is that moment where it is stirring the gut and it refuses to be tamed, which is a good thing. And then there's the power prestige thing that's going on. And, well, today, God is at work. God is already at work. Joseph did not have to look. Joseph did not have to ask. Joseph acted the way Joseph knew how to act. And God was already at work. And so for us as church, we are in that same place. We look around and we might say we are no longer in the place of power and prestige that we once were. We are no longer sort of at the height of the ark. We're down somewhere, maybe climbing back up again. We've called a new pastor, and that's either mean we're doing more down or more up. You can decide later. But God is already at work. We don't have to search. We don't have to ask. We need to lean back and just do what it is we know already to do as church. To be the people of faith that we already are called to be. God is there. Thanks be to God. Amen.